Welcome to Fire Emblem Fates. This game was the follow-up to Fire Emblem Awakening, which was a huge commercial success. However, mechanically speaking, Awakening was a bit of a mess. For Fates, the developers took the engine back into the shop and rebuilt it into something that really sings. The Conquest route in particular is challenging but fair. The combat systems are dynamic and interesting, and there are a huge array of fun strategies that are viable even on the hardest difficulty, which is what we're going to play. But this isn't going to be a typical Conquest run. I have made a lot of videos about this game that cover individual maps, and I've done a few mini-series, but I've never shown a continuous playthrough. That's because I've been cooking up something truly special. The thing I've always found disappointing about individual Fire Emblem playthroughs is that most characters don't really get a fair shake. Usually, the number of units you can deploy on each map is far less than the size of the roster, and the games reward you for sticking to a small, core group of characters. You feed those units all the experience, they become way stronger than the enemies, and then you cruise to victory. Meanwhile, most of the team sees a single battle, maybe two, and then languishes on the bench forever. And that is an injustice that will not stand. On this run, we are going to recruit and train every single character. Of course, it's not totally clear what that means. What I want to do is develop every unit to a point where they could reasonably contribute in combat during the last few chapters of the campaign. To me, the most sensible concrete benchmark for that is reaching level 5 in a promoted class. That's when you unlock great utility skills like rallies, and a character who trained up to level 20 and then reached promoted level 5 would generally have enough stats to be at least passable in the fight. However, I don't think it should really count if a unit promotes at level 10, the lowest level possible, and then only gets to level 5 in their promoted class. So to compensate, I'm going to require that if a unit skips any levels by promoting early, they have to make up for that after promotion. Let's formalize the rules here. Number 1, I have to recruit all 40 playable characters. Number 2, at the end of the campaign, the sum of a unit's level before promotion and their displayed level in their final class must be at least 25. Number 3, there's no grinding, no DLC or multiplayer battles are allowed. And that's it. That's the main rule set. However, I have done this challenge by myself twice before, and I want to spice it up a little, so I'm adding a couple of extra objectives. First, every character should get married. 4 characters can only marry Corrin, our avatar. They can't all do that, so those 4 are only required to unlock an A-rank support with Corrin. In Fates, characters who get married receive access to their partner's base class. They can also acquire a class through an A+ support with a friend, and I want every character to do so. Corrin is allowed to unlock multiple classes this way, so in their case, we're going to acquire all of them. Lastly, I want to collect every unique capturable boss as trophies. Unfortunately, we won't be able to use them. I have a few additional rules relating to this game's My Castle feature. I don't want to bore you with the details, but if you're curious, you can read them here. The point of this run is the gameplay challenge, but since I'm going to feature every character, I'd like to present the story too. However, the plot of Conquest is extremely stupid. I could just make fun of it, but I think all those jokes are played out, and I don't have much to offer. So instead, I'm going to showcase a fan-made rewrite called the Good Guy Garen mod. I don't think you can solve all the problems with the writing in Fates just by editing the script, but from what I've seen, Good Guy Garen looks like a valiant attempt. I'd like to experience it in full with you, and we can decide just how successful the rewrite really is. I'm also using a whole bunch of other mods, mostly cosmetic ones. You can read about those in the description. We're playing on Lunatic difficulty, and we're going to leave permadeath on. This isn't an Iron Man, so I won't actually let anyone die, but Classic mode prevents me from breaking the game by making temporary sacrifices. The choice of gender for Corrin affects a couple of things. The only one that matters early on is that male Corrin is joined first by his maid, Felicia, while female Corrin gets her butler, Jakob. Jakob has more strength and defense, and that makes him better for these first few chapters. This isn't a permanent choice, though. You can redo character creation at the route split after Chapter 5. We'll talk about the long-term differences then. The last 3 parameters here have significant gameplay effects. We will choose Clever as our boon, Excitable as our bane, and Dragon as our talent. The Clever boon boosts our magic stat. That's actually useless before the route split, but after Chapter 5, we'll receive a very powerful magic weapon called a Dragonstone. The catch is that most weapons can hit twice if you're fast enough, but the Dragonstone can't. It just hits very hard a single time. To maximize its power, we want to gain a lot of raw magic. Our Bane will be Resistance. Resistance is a dump stat early on because you don't even fight anyone who attacks using magic until Chapter 5, and Corrin usually doesn't take hits from those enemies anyway. The combination of Boon and Bane is what determines Corrin's personal support bonuses, and the Magic Boon Res Bane pairing isn't ideal for those, but we can change these settings before we enter Conquest proper. The last parameter is our talent, which determines our alternate class set. Dragon represents the Wyvern Rider class. As is usual for Fire Emblem, the Fates version of Wyvern Rider is extremely powerful, although it's far from the only great option. It doesn't matter what you pick until after the route split. Before then, you don't get any class-changing items. So once again, we'll reserve a detailed discussion about the gameplay considerations here until the beginning of Chapter 6. If you're in doubt, Dragon Talent is my general recommendation, and that's why we're using it now. With that, character creation is done. Let's get this adventure started.
Destined to seek life beyond the shore, just out of reach. Yet the waters ever change, flowing like time. The path is yours to climb.
Dorian General, you face the High Prince of Hoshido, Ryoma. I challenge you to single combat.
I will accept your challenge, High Prince. But I'm no general. I am crowned Prince Sander of North! Ha! 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 Ha!
Here I go.
Here's a bit of trivia. The enemy fighter has a blue outfit as if he's a player-controlled unit, rather than red. It'll change when the battle starts.
Are you all right?
And now we begin our career in the midst of a giant battle.
Okay.
That fighter serves as the object of a basic combat tutorial.
All right.
Tell me, Prince of Nor.
Right now, we don't have any context for whatever Ryoma and Xander are talking about, but their battle shows us an example of an offensive trigger skill in Astra.
For the glory of Hoshido!
It'll be a long time before we have to face those skills on enemies.
No. Not to worry. Yes.
The Dragonbane mechanic was new in Fates. I think it was one of the cooler additions, but it hasn't come back, and I'd like to see it iterated upon in the future.
What?
Yes.
Stay focused.
Viewing these cutscenes again as an experienced player, I'm much more aware of how this game tries to tutorialize.
Here I come.
This encounter between Benny and Saizo gives us our first look at the dual strike mechanic after it was redesigned from Awakening. We'll be prompted to use it ourselves in a moment.
I see the enemy.
Yes.
Yes!
Keep it together.
We won't give up.
We must defend Hoshiro!
Oh no! Come on. I'm with you. Be careful.
We have a new punching bag, but before we attack him, let's stop and smell the roses. This map gives you a preview of a lot of characters on both sides of the conflict between Hoshido and Nor. The 4 Norian royal siblings are up north, and then in the south we have a sizable chunk of the rest of the Norian cast. Interestingly, this is the only place in the entire game where you can encounter Nyx as a red unit. You never fight her in any route. The allied army in green is the Hoshidans. Since we're going to choose the Conquest route, we will side with Nor, and these people won't stay our allies for long. We will eventually fight every single one of them. That's enough sightseeing for now. Takumi will explain how we should get on with it.
Listen.
I believe. Need a hand? Let's go. I did it!
Is this the first time in Fire Emblem history that a game lied about the objective? It said rout the enemy, but we only defeated 2 of them.
Okay. Amazing!
That went well.
Come on. Big brother.
Steel yourself. You're not hurt, are you? Not on my watch! Silence!
Oh.
You have the devil's own luck.
Thank goodness! Norian scum! No.
Don't be fooled. Come back.
Huh, it was all a dream. Next time, let's wake up and find out what's really going on.